instructor, Nate, or I guess it's morning for you, huh?
Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom, Shabbat, 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 Shabbat shalom. Good morning.
Hello.
Boker tov, boker. It's morning for 20 more minutes. Yes, so I was finishing up the portions. I was reading 1 Timothy 5:23, and it said, "Stop drinking water, instead use a little wine for the sake of digestion and because of your frequent illness." And I'm like, oh, maybe this is a message for Father.
It's a God thing, yeah. Need to get drunk, huh?
I literally I'm like, oh, that's sad. And I'm like, well, let me finish these because I only had 2 sections left to read, the Timothy and the Hebrews one. And so I read that right after you said that. I'm like,
yeah, actually, I'm looking at this, and I didn't finish those either. I did all the Deuteronomy and the Isaiah and the Matthew and the John, and then all the Acts. I think I have those last 3 to finish, but this week has been a little bit crazy. I thought I was done, but I'm looking at my list, and I had a lot of questions. I had trouble this week. Last week I thought I had stuff. This week I'm like, some of the stuff I'm like,
Yeah, I hear you.
I have a question for you. In regards to, we're talking about the temple, right? So clearly, I mean, everybody wants to see the temple back, correct?
Even Jews today, a lot of Jews don't consider the temple like a thing that's gonna come back. But there are a lot. I even saw a post the other day of them looked like they were about to do a sacrifice right outside the Wailing Wall, which I thought was interesting because it says
it's like the temple's going to be for worship, correct? And will the temple still it's going to require sacrifice because obviously they're still looking for the red heifer. But how about you with your beliefs or the Jews that are Christians when it comes to that? They'll want to worship at the temple, correct? But are they going to want to sacrifice? Hasn't the sacrifice been done already? What is the Messianic Jews' take on that?
Well, we even see that with the temple and the millennial reign before Yahweh becomes the temple. It says that he will become the temple after the millennial reign, that there is sacrifice going on for that 1,000-year period, and it talks about the nations coming up to Israel to celebrate the feasts, and the feasts usually require a sacrifice of some sort, like Passover. So we see
but the Jews that are born again believers, are they going to want to sacrifice cows and chickens and stuff, or doves or whatever, and lambs, or are they just going to want to worship there?
That's definitely ties into this portion because you have the covenants. The idea of okay, we have the Abrahamic Covenant, which is essentially it's the promise of Yeshua, Jesus, because it was on faith, because the fire pot walked the path for Abraham. He's like, I know you can't do this, so I'm going to send someone who can do this to complete that covenant.
Yeah.
So, and then the Mosaic Covenant followed that, which was Torah, which is the law, and it doesn't abolish the Abraham Covenant. It's built on that foundation. So you can think of Abraham Covenant like faith. We need faith first, and then Mosaic Covenant is the written law, understanding how to act out our faith. And then we can't keep either of these things. We couldn't do the Abrahamic Covenant. We couldn't do the Mosaic Covenant. So Yeshua was the new covenant, the blood covenant, and he completed that for us. So he completed all the covenants out of himself.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So I mean, but obviously we would be interested in worshiping at the temple, but we're not going to want to do a blood sacrifice in the temple, correct? That's
Well, it's what were the sacrifices
really
for?
stumbling around with that.
So the sacrifices were not for salvation. They never were. They were to set us apart, and they were for purification. And there was lots of different sacrifices, and there were a covering of sins in a sense, where Jesus was, you know, the final sacrifice for that's sake. But as far as doing sacrifice, they were something that was pleasing to God. It was something to honor Him while we live in this sinful world. So it's not about receiving salvation doing these sacrifices. It's not like what Catholics do, where they're like, oh, I gotta repent of my sin and say my Hail Marys so I can earn my salvation back. It's not that way. It's the Mosaic Covenant was all about blessings. It's like, okay, do these things and you will be blessed. Don't do these things and you'll receive curses. So I think without the temple, we are actually living in a bit of a cursed state. We are in exile, so we're not receiving the blessing of that relationship with God, that covenant relationship. The whole idea is to get back to the garden, right, where man walked with God, and that's kind of completed after the millennial reign. God will come down again with the renewed earth. It'll be a Garden of Eden scenario. But there's curses involved in that because we can't have that close-knit relationship with Him. Like in the wilderness, they were actually closer to God than we've ever experienced, I feel.
But the Jews never had an option of salvation ever in any of their beliefs, correct?
Well, even with Abraham, what Hebrew, the definition of being Hebraic is to pass through a medium of water, to be born again. So Abraham was saved. It says it in the Bible. Abraham was saved by his faith well before Yeshua, Jesus. So yes, there was salvation through the promise of Jesus.
All right.
Because even the New Testament states that Abraham was saved by his faith. Then that goes back to that covenant idea that he had, because he didn't walk that blood path when he separated the animals.
So are there saved Jews even if they don't believe in Jesus?
No, we got a couple verses on that today too. I think I tried to write them down. Yeah, so Hebrews 10. When you think about Hebrews, it was written to the Hebrews, so it would have been essentially Messianic Jews, right?
Yeah.
And there was a lot of them. I don't think we realize that there was a lot of Jews who, like, if you read the complete Jewish Bible, it never uses the word converted. Because we think of they converted from being a Hebrew to a Christian. Well, that doesn't make any sense, right? It's because the whole Old Testament talks about Jesus, talks about this figure coming to complete it. So it's still the same faith. We're not losing any of these old covenants and replacing it with something new. It's just a continuation and evolution of it. So we have an evolution of these covenants, taking on just a new identity through Jesus. He's just a fulfillment of already what happened. So that they've already had salvation based on a Messiah that would come, but rejecting him at the same time is not good. So if you read Hebrews 10:29 or 28 first, it says this is the King James Version, so it says, he despises Moses' law, died without mercy under 2 or 3 witnesses, which relates back to the Torah portion. And then, of how much sore punishment suppose ye shall ye be thought worthy, who hath trodden underfoot the Son of God, and hath counted the blood of the covenant wherewith he was sanctified an unholy thing, and hath done despite unto the Spirit of grace. So rejecting the Messiah even if you're keeping the laws best of your ability and being really like a Pharisee, trying to be as holy as you can, it's not going to be enough if you've rejected Yeshua. So I think you can be like Jewish today and still receive some salvation because you're still believing in, okay, I can't do this on my own. That's the problem with Judaism because it's evolved into something different. It's evolved into almost like a works-based salvation. But if we reel it back, what they believed at the time of Moses, it was all based on faith. It was all through faith and grace through Abraham and that Abrahamic Covenant. And walking out the Mosaic law was actually just to be set apart and receive blessing and to keep you protected from sin and teach you how to walk out your faith, right? The faith you have first, and then how do we walk out this faith life? So the Mosaic law was a helper. Like, okay, how do I do this thing? So that way you don't like make up things in your own mind, like how I should live. Teaches you what to do. But if you're just, okay, I have to follow these list of rules and I'll be good, that's not good. That's not going to work out for you.
That was a question. Go ahead, Al. Can you hear?
Yeah.
David, the man after God's own heart.
He didn't do good either, did he?
No, but he still, basically, even though he did a lot of bad, he still sought after God. That's the thing. He's better than any else. Anyway, I was wondering about his faith then. He be counted as one of the faithful.
Definitely, and I think that's the point he was trying to make there. Is it's the heart. Are you doing these laws with the right heart? Because it's okay if you sin, but what are you doing after? It's like, oh, I'm trying to be perfect. Like he realized he was a sinner. He realized that he kept messing up, and everything that he went through was, with Bathsheba, then his sons leading revolts against him, and all that he suffered. His heart stayed true and faithful to God.
And then there's Noah. What about Noah?
I think he was saved as well.
And he drank wine.
Yeah. He got in trouble for that. Or I guess his son got in trouble for that.
Okay, so that's it today's lesson. And then there's Al.
He drank wine.
Or does he need to drink wine? I need to drink a special wine. We'll look for it today. Not just any wine. I've been drinking so much water. We'll see.
Yeah, maybe the Bible's right on this one.
That'll help you sleep too. That's right out.
Somebody said, I can't remember who the teacher was, but I thought you'd like this saying. He says, first we have to cut ourselves off from evil before we can be grafted into righteousness. I thought that was a good way of putting it. We can't be grafted into two different trees. I think too many people are like, oh, it's just once you're saved, you're good. But you have to realize, understand what wrong is. That's why I think the Mosaic Law still has relevance and importance.
Power.
I think Jesus was the Word, right? So in a way, he was the Torah. And
Everything.
And a cool part of this portion is we know that like he was a king, Jesus was a king, like just from the line of David. And kings weren't, I don't think they're really meant to be for Israel because Yahweh was always supposed to be the kingship figure over Israel. He allowed there to be a king, but he knew
People
that,
were looking for a king.
yes, he always wanted that intermediary. That the problem with, ultimate authority, right? Ultimate power corrupts ultimately. So all the kings didn't do very well, even the ones that were thought to be the best. Like you look at David's life, it's like, man, he dropped the ball a lot. Solomon dropped the ball a lot, but still, like, they wrote good portions of the Bible. But just when you're in that place, it doesn't matter how righteous you are, there's going to be so much temptation. It's going to be harder to be a leader. And that's why only Jesus could handle that amount of authority and kingship. I think that's one thing to show that. But another cool thing in the Torah portion was that the king had to handwrite the entire Torah, and he was supposed to keep it with him all the days of his life. So just like Jesus is the Torah, he was the king, so he kept it with him. So I think there's that symbolism there, that they were supposed to write it themselves and carry a scroll with them to remember how to be a leader. Isn't that cool? Let me see if I can find the verse. This was a large portion.
So when I went through all the feasts in Deuteronomy, I did good with everything until I got up to a couple of Deuteronomy verses. I did fine until I got to, I had a few questions along the way. The one where I put a huge question mark above it was 21 up 1 to 9, where it's talking about the unsolved murder thing.
What's the question? 21.
Yeah.
Oh,
He was 16 to 21:9 is what I was reading in Deuteronomy.
yeah.
And I was on a roll. I was doing good with all of that. I liked all of it. Felt comfortable with all of it till I got up to 21, where it's 1 to 9, where it's talking about the atonement for an unsolved murder, and I had my eyes crossed.
Then where they take the
But if you
heifer.
want to back up and tackle that later, that's fine.
Is that where they take the heifer into the down and they cut its head off? Take the heifer into the valley and behead it in the valley.
It's just a little much. So like I said, you want to go through I had a plan to go through something else first. Make a note that I want some explanation when we get to that.
Well, I think some people refer to Yeshua as being the red heifer sacrifice, but I think in a way he kind of was a picture of all the different sacrifices.
Okay, I can accept that.
Trying to understand. The King James is so hard to. Let's read it from the complete Jewish Bible and see if we get any insight there. Give me a second. Notice this helps sometimes. Deuteronomy 21, 1 through 9. Okay. So, if in the land Adonai your God is giving you to possess, a murder victim is found lying in the countryside, and the perpetrator of the murder is not known, then your leaders and judges are to go out and measure the distance between it and the surrounding towns. After it has been determined which town is closest, the leaders of that town are to take a young female cow that has never been put to work or yoked for use as a draft animal. The leaders of that town are to bring the heifer down to a wadi with a stream in it that never dries up, to a place that is neither plowed nor sown, and they are to break the cow's neck there in the wadi. And the Kohanim, who are Leviim, are to approach, for Adonai your God has chosen them to serve him and to pronounce blessings in the name of Adonai. They will decide the outcome of every dispute and matter involving violence. All the leaders of the town nearest the murder victim are to wash their hands over the cow whose neck was broken in the body. Then they are to speak up and say, "This blood was not shed by our hands, nor have we seen who did it. Adonai, forgive your people Israel, whom you redeemed. Do not allow innocent blood to be shed among your people Israel, and they will be forgiven this bloodshed. Thus he will banish the shedding of innocent blood from among you by doing what Adonai sees as right." Okay, I think definitely Jesus is a good picture of that red heifer being sacrificed for the people. But also we can think of this like Achan, because he was stoned because one person sinning affects everyone. So them washing their hands over that is a way of knowing, like, that they didn't, because even like Pilate washed his hands, say like my blood, isn't upon this man's life. Same idea. It is interesting. Sometimes they would cast lots to find out who the murderer was, like with Achan. Blessings in the name of Adonai will decide the outcome.
Okay, right. Tell me what were your questions for the lesson?
Same questions as last time. How did you feel that the Torah portion related to the other verses, the connected verses, being judges and all that? We already. How does this week's Torah portion relate to the Haftarah and New Testament portions?
Well, I'm still struggling with things like not celebrating birthdays, not celebrating, like it might be wrong to celebrate some of the established holidays. Faith in what's in your heart. It's almost like the concerns are almost more like dealing with the judgmental aspect of it.
Yeah, and I think that was my problem when I first got into this. It's a lot of people. It's very judgmental. They're like, don't keep Christmas. It's terrible. And obviously, people who are keeping Christmas aren't doing it for pagan reasons. But there's still that conviction that I feel like it's very clear that, hey, these are not Jewish feasts, these are God's feasts. It calls them Moedim, set appoint times, just as the Sabbath is considered a Moedim. It's an appointed time. So it's like almost like a date. God has a specific date He wants to meet with you, and we miss that date. So when we don't keep these feasts, we're missing out on blessings. So it's not like it's a sin, it's you're missing out on a blessing or a time that God wants to meet with you. It's almost like, I don't think there's anything wrong with celebrating a birthday, but it's like, if Alex told me that, or no, Nate, it's hard for me to remember your birthday, so I'm going to celebrate it on my ex-boyfriend's birthday date. And I know you like Black Forest cake, but I'm going to make you lemon cake, even though you've asked for Black Forest cake, just because that's all I've ever made. I've only ever made lemon cake. I don't want to do something new. And then you're doing it more for yourself and less for the other person. So every pastor will tell you that they know that he wasn't born on December 25th, but they still say, well, this is what we do because it's tradition. We know it has pagan roots, but we're reclaiming paganism for Christianity. And it's just sketchy. It's a sketchy way to think about it. He has these feast days that are for us that we are to keep, and we're not keeping, and we're keeping these other days. But that is a process. But it's more important to have the faith and the heart in the matter first, so you can help discern what the Bible's saying about what you should be doing. Oh, I found that verse on the king. It's Deuteronomy 17, 17 through 20. He shall be with him, he sit upon the throne of his kingdom, and he shall write a copy of this law in a book out of that which is before the priests of the Levites. And it shall be with him, and he shall read therein all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord of his God, to keep all the words of the Torah and these statutes, and to do them, that his heart be not lifted up above his brethren, and that he not turn aside from the commandment to the right or to the left, to the end that he may prolong his days in his kingdom, he and his children in the midst of Israel. I thought that was cool.
Neil's got a question.
Yes.
So, at any church during Christmas, the pastors will go to more people will go to church 2 days a year, Easter and Christmas. And like in real life, last year they had 15,000 people. And they used that as a tool and designed it all around getting the message of Christianity out. So even though it may be a pagan holiday, it's useful in getting the word out.
The road to hell is paved with good intentions.
There is good and bad. It depends on your heart.
How many of those people continue going to church? How come it goes?
No, it's a good point. What was I going to say? Oh, and Deuteronomy 18:9.
Deuteronomy 18 what?
9.
9. Just a second, let me catch up with you. Yeah.
It says, do not learn to do after the abominations of the nations when you come into the land. So if we study Christmas and its origins, it has a lot of these pagan rituals involved with it. These But I don't think there's anything wrong with meeting on December 25th, but like, do we need to have Christmas tree there? Do we need to have Easter ham on to celebrate the resurrection
Never
of
had an
Jesus?
Easter ham in your life.
I remember having Easter ham.
What?
I remember having Easter ham.
You never had Easter. Well, unless one of the grandmas made it.
Oh.
How about
We did have egg hunts though.
yeah, we had egg hunts.
If you think
remember
about,
I wanted to do them when we were teenagers.
Yeah, I mean you were the first one out there and liked it the most. Never mind. Where was I? Yeah, but how about is it wrong to give a gift to someone on a birthday or a Christmas or an Easter? If that's wrong, then that's offensive to you?
I don't think so. I don't think it's wrong to give, because it doesn't say anything about birthdays in the Bible.
You just told me last week that you don't celebrate birthdays, or you put it in writing someplace. You don't do birthdays.
I just said that the Jews didn't celebrate birthdays. It wasn't like a common thing. And nowhere are we told to remember his birthday. He does say, "Do this in remembrance of me," regarding to Passover, that we should keep that as a memorial.
The reason Jews didn't give gifts is that they were cheap.
That's awful.
So you hear that all the time about Jews are always, what's the saying? It's a saying even.
Jews are like
I'm
that.
not a pyramid saying,
Yeah, there's a whole thing about that Jews are like really cheap.
Alex and I feel there is much wrong with Jews today. So we don't put Jews on a pedestal, just to be clear. We think they're very deceptive. And I think people need to be careful when they say we stand with Israel, because I don't think Israel stands with God today. There are Jews who do, but as a nation, they are not following after God right now. Let's move on to some other questions. I don't like this topic.
go ahead.
Does it's birthday?
It was just stuff to read, and you asked what we were here, had questions about.
I mean, I can send you a teaching on it if you'd like. There's one called Jim Staley called Truth or Tradition, which he takes a very fair look at it. I don't know if Alex has any suggestions on that. I think too many people get focused on these arguments, and they're not as important as we make them. But I think there's just so much blessing I've noticed in my life just studying like what surrounds these feasts and how they are important, how really the whole story of the Bible is built into these feasts, and that some are future feasts to be celebrated. Like some people say the spring feasts have all been completed, and the fall feasts are predictive of the future. Like Sukkot is the millennial reign, because when he'll tabernacle with us, a lot of people believe Jesus was born on Sukkot. It's when he tabernacled with us. Circumcised on the 8th day. There's an 8th day of Sukkot. So it's a picture of Jesus. Trumpets is the only feast that's not given a reason for. So I think that trumpets will be a time when Revelation is fulfilled, because there's lots of trumps in Revelation. And then Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement, where the high priest would go into the Holy of Holies, the one time a year you would do that, to sprinkle blood on the altar. I think it's a picture of not only Jesus dying to atone, but when he'll come back. They're important days. Got to understand the beginning to understand the end.
Can we answer the question?
Well, the question was, how do the New Testament relate to the Old Testament? Then you start asking about Christmas.
All right. Well, that's because I'm trying to merge the teachings of the old with the new and apply it to what we do today. So,
So, at the very least, the Torah says, doesn't say anything about Christmas, but it does say keep these days. So at the very least, we know it says that. So there's nothing wrong with traditions like 4th of July. I don't see a problem with, or even Thanksgiving. I don't really see a problem with celebrating a tradition like that.
Thanksgiving, I mean, the Christians that came to the United States that were seeking religious freedom recognized the Old Testament. And so with the harvest, I mean, that's what they were doing, is they were worshiping and giving thanks for God's blessing. It was essentially the same thing, was it not?
I believe a lot of them were actually celebrating a Jewish feast.
But of course, what we've done with Thanksgiving is a travesty. We made it a pig party.
Pig party. Oh.
Yeah, I mean, really, it's a lot of people that, even Christians, I mean, that's really all they do. They gorge themselves and all that food. On that.
Well, I think the Bible, for one of the for Sukkot, that was your tithe for that month or whatever was to go towards wine and food to celebrate a feast. It's the only feast where God tells you, take your tithe and put it in to buying food to celebrate. So Sukkot would be.
Where's that verse?
You're making me look things up.
You're gonna be past your date, and you're gonna leave you're gonna get weird people like me, and
My computer's not working. It's just slow. No, I just turned it on. I gotta wake up. Alex, Google. Just look up verses on Sukkot. The feasts are talked about in several places in the Torah and the commandments for what you're supposed to do. So some sections won't say things that others do.
I've never seen it before and wondered if it was like a Jewish writing or if it was actually scripture. To take your tithe that time and put it into food and wine.
It's detailed in Nehemiah 8:13 through 18.
That's another thing that bugs the heck out of me. I have all these Christians, like when we go to the Garden Tomb, we have a ceremony, and I always have to request for the wine, the alcohol free for all these people, but there's nowhere in Scripture that it tells you that. And I mean, and the wine that they serve is such a low alcohol wine. It's just I don't know. It's when we distort things and make it something different that God's word never says that.
Well, there's actually something in the Bible talks about that. I can't remember what it's called, but the same way with bread. There's people who keep strands of yeast to make bread, and they've kept it for hundreds of years. Same with alcohol. They will preserve a yeast that they've trained to create a strong percentage of wine that's kind of unnatural. When the Bible actually tells you for Passover, you are to cleanse that yeast that, I think it's the hametz is the word, the lump. You're to remove that and start a new fresh batch as the first fruits come out. So when I make wine, it's pretty low percentage. I was just telling Alex, like the wine I had last night was the first time I actually felt a little bit of buzz from it, because normally it's just such a low percentage, I don't feel anything. And I think that's a protection mechanism, but also it's to say, like, hey, cleanse the sin out of your lives, because leaven is a symbol for sin. And that's another cool Passover thing with Jesus. He was the unleavened bread for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So he was the Passover lamb. He was without sin, so they would make matzah, the unleavened bread, during that time. And then he rose on the last, the day to be the first fruits. So is when he ascended into heaven on Shavuot, Pentecost. That he fulfills every feast. Find that verse, yeah.
There's 3 passages that talk about it.
Anyone mentioning taking your tithe to buy food, and am I just making this up? I'll be honest, I think I heard somebody else say it, so it might be just.
Well, I mean, it says you shall observe the feast of the harvest of the first fruits of your labors from what you sow in the field. Also the feast of the ingathering at the end of the year, when you gather in the fruit of your labors from the field. It doesn't say anything about feast.
Computer's still not working.
You shall celebrate the Feast of Booths 7 days after you have gathered in from your threshing floor and your wine vat.
I did mention wine, so it's something.
Deuteronomy 16.
Come on. All right, I'm going to one. Deuteronomy 16. I wasn't in this one, was it? Pesach. There's the hametz. 16 what? Oh, okay, you are to keep the festival of Sukkot for 7 days after you have gathered the produce of your threshing floor and wine press. Rejoice at your festival, you and your sons and your daughters, your male and female slaves, the Leviim and the foreigners, orphans, and the widows living among you. 7 days are you to keep the festival for Adonai, which shows again that everyone comes up for Sukkot during the millennial reign. I forget what verse that is, but the nations come out of like Egypt and stuff. 7 days are you to keep the festival for Adonai your God in the place Adonai your God will choose. So it's a pilgrim feast, which means you're supposed to go to Jerusalem to do it, but you can still memorialize it by sleeping in a tent. Done that before. Because Adonai your God will bless you in all your crops and all your works, so you're to be full of joy. So it is saying, like, be full of joy. Joy is food sometimes. Doesn't mean stuff your face. 3 times a year, all your men are to appear in the presence of Adonai in the place which he will choose. So the unleavened bread, Shavuot, and Sukkot.
Where are you reading from?
16, Deuteronomy 16, 16, 13.
16, right?
Deuteronomy 16
16, 13.
through 17.
Okay, yeah. All right.
maybe I'll email that. I'll dig deeper into this one. I will make a note.
All right, so the answer to the question relate is how it should relate would be we should study it and search our hearts and see what we can keep, how much we are able to keep from the original feast. You know, in some cases we might already be keeping them like with Thanksgiving, but maybe keep it differently than we've been doing with a change of heart. But that would be my answer to that. Right or wrong. In other words, absolutely, yes, should still relate.
Yeah, well, this portion was about, it's called Judges, Shoftim or whatever, Shoftim, about judges. So it's about judging and being a leader. And I felt like it was saying, like talking about kings, they talk about the kings in the Torah, and that's a judge, you know, he's a leader over men. And it's like, if you're a leader, you really need to communicate the word of God effectively. So those who do that are going to be blessed, and you know, teaching people to be set apart, teach the things that are right. You know, try to instruct people as a leader is, you know, not making stuff up and like, oh, it's as long as your heart says it's okay, it's okay. We got to teach the Torah. We got to teach this, because everywhere else in the Bible is just talking about how do you do the Torah right. Being a good judge that's what I think it was trying to communicate. It doesn't even really talk about the feasts in this section. Just somehow we got on that track. Maybe it did talk about it in 16. Oh yeah, because this is right after the feasts. So in the last portion,
Read 16 through 21, and then 16 starts out with all of the feasts.
it was 16, 18 was when the portion started. Oh, yeah. Here we go. It'll load this in 5 hours, then I can read it. Okay. So this is Deuteronomy 14. So it says, be sure to set aside 1/10 of all your field's produce each year. Eat the 10th of your grain, new wine, and olive oil, and the firstborn of your herds and flocks in the presence of the Lord your God at the place he will choose as a dwelling for his name, so that you may learn to revere the Lord your God always. But if that place is too distant and you have been blessed by the Lord your God and cannot carry your tithe because the place where your Lord will choose to put it, his name is far away, then exchange your tithe for silver and take that silver with you and go to the place the Lord your God will choose. Use that silver to buy whatever you like, cattle, sheep, wine, or other fermented drink, or anything you wish. Then you and your household shall eat there in the presence of the Lord your God and rejoice. So the reason I remember this is because it was the portion last week. Somehow I couldn't recall that. So I didn't make it up. It literally says, buy fermented wine, eat to your heart's delight, and rejoice for Sukkot. So a lot of people...
That raises the question then is, would it be wrong to, if you can only, with your income, have only 10% or a tithe, would it be wrong to also, in addition to celebrating that feast, to also give to the church?
No.
Is it commanding you to take it and eat it, or is it?
Well, I feel like it's, that's why everyone gets together. The whole idea of a pilgrim feast is you're going to be meeting with everybody. I feel that's why he calls us to Jerusalem is, the reason is you're getting together with everyone. So sharing and celebrating with other people and those that are less fortunate, because the whole point of the Torah is to make sure there is no poor in the land. They wouldn't have as many poor because it was all about giving back to people. Like, even the idea of slavery was to help people out. More like indentured servant. You would work for somebody for 7 years, then they would offer you, like, okay, now I'll give you some stuff and you can go be free, or you could even stay with me if you really enjoyed being a servant here and being a slave. It wasn't the idea that we have in America with stealing blacks from their land and forcing them into slavery. And it was about working in the community as a whole. Like, sometimes I wonder, seeing all these people on the street, like, why don't we just like teach them how to farm, teach them a skill, and help them work instead of just draining society. So it's all built into the Torah. So a lot of people are like, oh, you can keep slaves. Yes, Israel, that's terrible. But it was all to help the nation as a whole and even help those in slavery. And then it talks about, last portion, giving back. So even if you bought someone's land, you wouldn't change the borders. You would return that land eventually to them. I think it was 7 years as well. Just a lot of like, his wisdom is better than our wisdom. So once we dig a little deeper, we can understand this. And the point I was going to make before is, I think Thanksgiving was actually what the pilgrims were celebrating, because it's the idea, like, if you're too far away, they were still memorializing the harvest feast. I think Sukkot, it just seems really similar to that idea of, they're both harvest feasts, and they're really close in time frame. I'm not trying to defend gluttony, but I think God calls for celebration every once in a while. But it doesn't mean you can't give to the church. No, it doesn't say that.
Okay.
Good question. So that was Deuteronomy 14:22 through 26.
Yeah, I marked it.
And you're also supposed to build like a little booth or a tent. And I think you also wave the goodly boughs of trees. Is that the same feast? Yeah. So you cut off like the bough of a tree and you wave it to God. It's a wave offering, just to like thank him for all that he's given to you. So this is like the big celebration feast, which is a picture of the 8th day. There's a Jewish band called the 8th day. It's the idea of the 8th day is like the eternal Sabbath. It's like never ending, like, celebration. So we view Sabbath as the last day of the week. Saturday is God's rest. So it's going to be an eternal rest. So it's like a small picture of that.
Okay.
Next question is, what did you find most interesting about the week's reading? For me, it was like the idea of the blood covenant. Kind of bled into your question before. Bled into your question. Blood covenant. Then we had animals, and then we had Jesus, and what is the difference there, and the third temple, and how does that all work, and what do you do if there's a temple built? There's so many questions there that I don't have answers to. But that's definitely something I want to look into, is the Abrahamic Covenant, the Mosaic Covenant, the New Covenant. I don't think so.
So the cake last night was Black Forest cake?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, because I felt like mine wasn't as dark and rich as yours was.
I have the recipe someplace. That was actually not a healthy recipe. It was one that Kathy Cassis gave us, but you guys always loved it.
Yeah.
I can find it and send it to you.
Did you?
I
You probably
I only
handmade
made
the. Did you
I
hand
only
make
made
the
the exception
frosting?
on birthdays.
Did you hand make the frosting?
Yes.
Thought so. So I'm like, this canned stuff is not. It's not what I remember. And how'd you do the cherries?
What I did with the frosting, I believe, was a pudding combined with a whipped cream instead of like
That makes
a
sense.
frosting.
But pudding is gelatin.
You can get some without.
Yeah, it was always real whipped cream combined with a pudding for the topping for it. And I have that recipe someplace with it too. I'll look it up and send it to you. If you don't get it till next, you can't have it till next month. It was only for once a year anyway. Well, it says it's in my cookbook in Florida, so you won't get it till November.
We can make it for Jesus' birthday on Sukkot.
What? November?
It wasn't really the recipe, and it was all good stuff, but it was definitely not health food. But compared to cakes that you would buy in the grocery store, it probably was. I just felt so bad to find out that all those years that I was feeding the whole week stuff that it was making us sick.
I was just too dumb to realize that. I just assumed everyone was suffering like me. Or that if I complained about it, I'd just be like whining. Be like, oh, we'll just adjust you, Nate. It'll go away. But I've learned so much now.
Well, that's good.
I think movement is so important for the gut.
Say it again?
I think movement is so important for the gut, how we're moving, and our inability to hinge at the hips in our culture is related to poor gut motility. Other cultures always use flat foot squats, and it just creates bad muscle imbalance.
Okay.
That's it. That's all I gotta say.
That's good. I definitely had a movement and exercise. Probably not quality what you do, but certainly I believe I agree with that. I'm trying to stand straighter. Tell me, does Alex ever live up to your expectations with posture?
No one does. It's a dark world.
Oh, okay.
I taught
Because Alex, I know he's been really hard on his poor mother. I just wondered if he was being so difficult with his wife, too.
just because I care.
He's tough. Don't let him beat you up.
I won't.
All right. Yeah, what's your next question? Seeing we didn't answer either one to your satisfaction yet.
What is the general theme of this reading and how does it apply to our lives today?
I don't like my answer to that either. My answer would be the importance of your heart being genuine with approaching what God wants us to do and how He wants us to worship.
I think that's spot on. I think that was the Abrahamic Covenant, was faith and grace.
I think I got one right.
You got them all right. I think the matter of the heart is most important. But I think we can also learn a thing or two from the Jew on diving a little deeper into understanding the Torah and the importance of it. It's God's law.
Yeah, sad. If you think about people in general, even people who aren't churched, nobody's really studying the Bible. I mean, maybe a handful someplace, but nobody really does that anymore. And the ones that do are reading books by somebody about the Bible and not really going to it necessarily themselves.
Well, see,
Exactly.
there's a war on God in America. The whole goal of the Democratic Party is to eliminate America from God.
Separate.
Eliminate.
He's just focusing on elimination right now. It's fine.
Climate change is what they're using. We're going to save the planet. And then, when the planet is under our control, that's when it's all going to be better. Taking the place of God, eliminating God.
And I think there's a lot to be said about leaders, because this is Judges, right? Talked about leaders in the community. And I think about the book of Maccabees. That's the story of Hanukkah. So you had these really fervent, zealous people, Matthias and his son Judah, and his brothers, really reclaiming the land for God and fighting against, Antiochus Epiphanes and Hellenization and the setting up of the idols and the sacrifices of pigs on the altar. And he cleansed the land, but then what did he do? He set himself up as his people up as the high priests and themselves as the kings, which, first of all, it was only supposed to be of the tribe of Judah that were the kings. And that led into Herod marrying a Hasmonean princess and leading up to the destruction of the temple because of that. They did stuff right, but they weren't following how the Torah prescribed things, how the kingship should be done. And Herod was technically, I think he was a foreigner. He wasn't even supposed to be a king, because he was half Edomite.
Yes, on his own, he had no right, no claim.
And the high priests, instead of being like the last portion, talked about them being, like the servants, were given these, almost power positions. And the high priests were chosen by Herod, and it was almost like a political position instead of being from the line of Zadok, like it's supposed to be. So some people even say that John the Baptist was supposed to be the true high priest.
Was he a direct descendant of Zadok?
Well, his father was, and it kind of indicates that he was the high priest. I can't remember who it
His
was.
father wasn't a high priest. His father was a priest. But the high priest was direct
Ananias.
descendant from Zadok. There were a lot of priests that weren't descendants of Zadok.
Well, they weren't supposed to be.
The high priests were.
Well, I was just saying, like, they weren't supposed to be high priests if they weren't. It was that time of the Hasmoneans, and then Herod, even Antiochus Epiphanes at one point removed the high priest and set up like Jason or something, or the other way around. I can't remember.
Well, I was under the impression that the Hasmoneans really didn't have a claim either, except that Matthias became recognized.
That's what I was saying. They didn't have a claim, but I thought they did right by cleansing the land. That doesn't mean that they should have taken the kingship. It's like, that whole Captain America movie where it's like safest hands are our own. It's like they were trusting more in themselves than trusting in God.
Okay.
A lot of people start out as heroes. I can't really blame Judah Maccabee because he died and most of his brothers died.
That's it. And I mean, the ones that were left then were the least, and not necessarily with the extreme commitment, but they already seized power, so they didn't have the claim. Nobody really did. So when Herod came along, he was probably as good as anybody, especially after he married the Hasmonean princess Miriam. But he was never recognized or accepted by anybody anyway, except that he held the power first.
Agreed.
Right. So I don't know how we got on that either.
It's a good side topic. Reminds me I need to read more Josephus.
Are there any questions left?
No. No
We
questions.
did it?
We did it.
Well, I think we're going to get dressed and try to head out to do some things we have to do, and if Pod's able. Well, I think we're going to try to go to church tonight for the first time in 3 weeks.
The wine is still a little better.
Oh, you had wine?
Yeah.
Oh, we had wine. He said you're happy as a clam. That's why this is done.
At least mentally he's feeling better.
Wasn't purified.
He's gonna start speaking in tongues at church.
I'm gonna bring the bottle into church.
Just
Right.
stumble into church.
Just sit.
Oh, I had a question. It has nothing to do with Bible study. You said you got your flight,
Yes.
and I sent you directions from JFK. You said JFK. What day are you flying?
We're flying Saturday instead of Sunday.
So you're flying the 22nd?
That would be, I think it's the 21st. Or maybe it's Friday
Okay.
we're leaving. I don't know.
And then when are you flying back? Do you need a hotel in New York City, or were you able to find a flight to you were using a different airport?
I already got the hotel booked for, I think it's the 4th. I can send you
The night of the
everything if you
4th?
like. Yeah. And send me
And
your.
where's JFK? Did you find one at Federal Circle?
Oh, I don't know. I just found a cheap one. I figured we could taxi to and walk around.
Where's the hotel?
I don't know.
What do you mean you don't know?
Okay, well, as long as, I mean,
I'll
you're
send
covered
you
for good.
send you everything.